You're walking down a street in your hometown, maybe on your way to work or running errands, and chances are the path beneath your feet owes its existence to an idea born 2,000 years ago. The Romans didn't just build roads, they laid the literal groundwork for the modern world, and their legacy is still etched into the earth beneath us. Picture this, a network of stone and gravel stretching over 50,000 miles, connecting cities, crossing rivers, and climbing mountains with such precision that some of these ancient highways are still in use today. This wasn't just about getting from point A to point B, it was about empire, innovation, and a vision of unity that would outlast Rome itself. What's truly astonishing isn't just the scale of these roads, but how they were built to last. The Romans didn't cut corners, they dug deep, layered crushed stone, sand, and mortar, and crowned each road so rainwater would drain away, techniques so effective that modern engineers still study them. These weren't mere paths, they were masterpieces of durability, designed to withstand the weight of armies, the rush of trade caravans, and the relentless march of time. And here's the thing, when you drive on a highway or stroll through a city grid, you're often following routes that were mapped out centuries before the first car was invented. The Romans didn't just shape their world, they shaped ours. But the story of these roads is more than just engineering. It's about how they bound continents together, carrying not just soldiers and goods, but ideas, cultures, and languages. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just a boast, it was a reality. These pathways became the veins of an empire, pumping life into distant provinces and creating a shared identity that stretched from Britain to Egypt. Today, we'll trace those veins, uncovering how the choices made by ancient surveyors and laborers still influence where we live, how we travel, and even how our cities are designed. So buckle up, we're about to take a journey through time, and the road ahead is older than you think. The story of Roman roads begins not with grand ambition, but with a simple problem: how to move legions quickly across rugged terrain. In the early days of the Republic, dirt paths carved by traders and farmers were enough for local travel. But as Rome's influence grew, so did the need for something sturdier. The first major breakthrough came with the Appian Way in 312 BC, a marvel of its time that connected Rome to distant Capua. This wasn't just a road, it was a statement. Built to speed troops south during the Samnite Wars, its smooth, leveled surface allowed soldiers to march 20 miles a day, a game-changing advantage in an era when muddy trails could stall an army for weeks. What set Roman engineers apart was their obsession with precision. They didn't just follow the land, they mastered it, using tools like the groma to plot straight lines and chorobates to level surfaces. They carved through hills, bridged rivers, and even tunneled through rock to maintain direct routes. The secret, a layered system that started with packed earth, then crushed stone mixed with clay, topped with gravel, and finally fitted stone slabs. This wasn't just construction, it was craftsmanship designed to endure. And endure it did. Sections of the Appian Way still exist today, their stones worn smooth by 2 millennia of footsteps. But these roads were more than military tools. They became the empire's nervous system. Messengers could race from Rome to Britain's farthest outposts in weeks, not months. Tax collectors, merchants, and even ordinary citizens gained access to distant markets and ideas. The roads were so vital that maintaining them became a sacred duty, overseen by officials who understood their power. A well-built road meant control, wealth, and unity, the very pillars of Rome's dominance. And as the network expanded, so did the empire's ability to project its culture, laws, and language into every conquered territory. The roads didn't just carry soldiers, they carried civilization itself. The true brilliance of Roman roads lies in what's beneath the surface, literally. Imagine peeling back a cross-section of one of these ancient highways. At the very bottom, you'd find a trench dug deep into the earth, filled with packed sand or clay to create a stable base. This wasn't just dirt haphazardly thrown in. It was carefully compacted, layer by layer, to prevent shifting over time. Next came the rubble, fist-sized stones mixed with mortar, forming a flexible yet unyielding foundation. Above that, a thick bed of gravel provided drainage, while the crowning glory was the surface layer, tightly interlocking slabs of volcanic rock or limestone, fitted together like puzzle pieces. This wasn't just construction. It was a symphony of materials, each playing a critical role in creating something far greater than the sum of its parts. What's even more impressive is how these roads handled the elements. Roman engineers didn't just build flat surfaces, they designed them with a subtle curvature, higher in the center and sloping gently toward the edges. This ingenious touch allowed rainwater to drain off quickly, preventing puddles that could soften the roadbed or freeze into dangerous ruts in winter. In swampy areas, they went further, driving wooden pilings deep into the muck to create stable causeways that wouldn't sink, and where rivers blocked the path. They built bridges so sturdy that some, like Spain's Alcantara Bridge, still stand today, their arches defying gravity after nearly 2,000 years. But the innovation didn't stop at the road itself. Every mile was marked with stone pillars carved with distances to the nearest towns, an ancient version of modern highway markers. Travelers could stop at way stations known as mutations to change horses or rest at full-service inns called mansions, complete with baths and markets. This wasn't just infrastructure. It was an entire ecosystem designed to keep people and goods moving efficiently across vast distances. The Romans understood that a road was only as good as the support system around it, and they built accordingly. Perhaps the most telling detail of all, many of these roads didn't just survive the fall of Rome, they outlived entire civilizations. Medieval merchants trudged along their stones, Renaissance artists sketched their ruins, and today, modern cars roll over routes that still follow the original Roman surveys. That's the ultimate testament to their engineering. When we talk about building things to last, we're still measuring against a standard set 2 millennia ago. The next time you see a highway crew laying fresh asphalt, remember they're standing on the shoulders of giants. The Appian Way wasn't just Rome's first major road, it was a revolution in motion. Picture 312 BC, when most of Europe was still trudging along dirt tracks that turned to mud with every rainstorm. Then came this arrow-straight marvel, stretching 162 miles from Rome to Capua, later extended all the way to Brindisi on the Adriatic coast. This was no ordinary path. Its builders didn't just clear land, they transformed it, carving through hills, bridging marshes, and laying stones so meticulously that even today, you can see grooves worn by countless chariot wheels. What made the Appian Way extraordinary wasn't just its construction, but its purpose. This was a road born from urgency. During the Samnite Wars, Rome needed to move legions south fast, and the old winding trails simply wouldn't do. So they built a highway wide enough for 5 soldiers to march abreast, with a surface so smooth that messengers could cover 25 miles a day, unheard of at the time. But its military genius had a ripple effect. Suddenly, olive oil from Puglia, wine from Campania, and marble from Greece could flow into Rome with unprecedented speed. The Appian Way didn't just transport soldiers, it fueled an economic explosion. walk its remaining stretches today, and you're stepping into layered history. Those same stones once felt the boots of Crassus's legions hunting Spartacus's rebels in 71 BC, and later bore the weight of 6,000 crucified men lining the roadside as a grim warning. Yet it also carried pilgrims, poets, and emperors. Augustus himself traveled it to reach Brundisium for diplomatic missions. The road even shaped burial customs, with wealthy families building lavish tombs along its edges, turning it into a sprawling open-air gallery of Roman ambition. Perhaps most astonishing is how much of it endures. Near Rome's outskirts, original basalt slabs still form a walkable path, their dark surfaces polished by centuries of use. Modern engineers have found sections where the original foundation remains intact, thanks to that ingenious layered design: compact soil, crushed stone, and mortar topped with interlocking stones. It's a living lesson in durability, outlasting empires, invasions, and the rise of asphalt. When you stand on the Appian Way, you're not just looking at an ancient road, you're witnessing the birth of an idea that would circle the globe. Rome didn't just build a highway, it built a blueprint for how civilizations connect. Speed wasn't just an advantage for Rome, it was their ultimate weapon. Picture this: while rival armies struggled through muddy trails, Roman legions could march 25 miles a day on engineered highways, arriving fresh and battle-ready. This wasn't just about moving faster, it was about rewriting the rules of warfare. When rebellion flared in Gaul or invaders threatened the Danube frontier, news could reach Rome in days, not weeks, and crack troops would be rolling over those same roads before enemies even finished celebrating their initial victories. The real genius lay in how these roads reshaped military strategy. Forts weren't placed randomly, they were positioned precisely a day's march apart along major routes, creating an unbreakable chain of control. Supply wagons could follow legions effortlessly, meaning Roman soldiers didn't waste time foraging like other armies. Caesar famously moved 8 legions nearly 300 miles in just 27 days during the Gallic Wars, a feat impossible without roads that functioned like ancient freeways. Even the famous testudo formation, that mobile armored shell of shields, worked best on flat, hard surfaces where soldiers could maintain perfect alignment. But the road's true power went beyond troop movements. They carried something far more dangerous to Rome's enemies: information. Imperial messengers called Cursus Publicus could cover up to 50 miles a day using relay stations, meaning governors could coordinate responses across entire provinces with unprecedented speed. When Boudicca's rebellion erupted in Britain in 61 AD, news reached Rome within 2 weeks, and reinforcements were marching before the ashes of Londinium had cooled. This network became Rome's nervous system wherever trouble appeared. The empire could react faster than thought possible in the ancient world. The famous phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," held terrifying implications for rebels and invaders alike. It meant no matter where you struck the empire, Rome's retaliation would arrive with brutal efficiency. These stone pathways weren't just infrastructure, they were the steel threads holding an empire together, allowing a single city to project power across 3 continents. Without them, the legions would have been bogged down like every other army in history, and the Pax Romana might have been just another short-lived kingdom lost to time. Yet the road's military legacy outlasted Rome itself. Centuries later, Napoleon studied Roman routes when planning his own campaigns, and modern armies still train in rapid deployment along highways. That original Roman insight that control isn't about territory, but about how quickly you can move through it reshaped warfare forever. The next time you see a news report about troops deploying via airlift or high-speed rail, remember, they're using principles first mastered by engineers in sandals and tunics 2,000 years ago. Trade and economy didn't just move along Roman roads, they exploded because of them. Imagine amphorae of Spanish olive oil rolling north to Germania, Gallic wine sailing east to Greece, or British tin heading south to craft bronze statues in Rome. These routes transformed local markets into a sprawling continental marketplace where a merchant in Alexandria could sell Egyptian grain to a baker in Lyon, all because a network of stone highways made such unthinkable distances suddenly manageable. The real game changer was speed. Where once a trader might spend weeks navigating muddy trails with a creaking ox cart, Roman roads cut travel times in half. A donkey could now carry twice as much cargo in the same time frame, meaning more profit with less risk. Tax collectors followed close behind, their ledgers fattening as commerce flourished. Port cities like Augusta boomed as goods flowed in from every corner of the empire. African ivory, Syrian glass, and even Chinese silk that had traveled thousands of miles along interconnected trade routes. The roads didn't just carry goods, they created an economic ecosystem where tariffs funded armies, markets spurred innovation, and wealth circulated like blood through the empire's veins. What's often overlooked is how these roads standardized trade. Roman engineers built their highways to consistent widths, meaning a cart designed in Gaul could roll smoothly all the way to Macedonia without modifications. Milestones marked every 1,000 paces, allowing merchants to calculate shipping costs with precision. And way stations provided not just rest, but repair services, blacksmiths to fix axles, veterinarians to tend pack animals, and guards to protect against bandits. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a fully integrated supply chain that would feel eerily familiar to modern logistics companies. The cultural exchange was just as transformative as the economic one. Along with olive oil and pottery, these roads carried ideas, new farming techniques from Carthage, legal concepts from Greece, and religious beliefs from the East. Latin spread not through conquest alone, but because it became the language of contracts and commerce. A Syrian merchant might learn it to negotiate with a Spanish wine seller, while a Dacian farmer picked up phrases to sell his grain at the nearest Roman market town. The roads didn't just move goods, they dissolved barriers between cultures, creating a shared Mediterranean identity that still echoes today. Perhaps the most telling evidence lies in the ruins of Pompeii's streets, where deep ruts worn by countless carts testify to centuries of relentless trade. Or in the shipwrecks off the Italian coast, their holds still packed with Spanish lead ingots and North African grain, all destined for Roman markets via those very roads. This network was so vital that when the empire finally crumbled, medieval kingdoms fought bitterly to control its remnants. The Via Aurelia became the pilgrimage route to Rome. The Via Egnatia morphed into a critical link between Constantinople and Venice, and the Silk Road's western branches kept flourishing long after Rome's fall. Today, we see their legacy in everything from global shipping lanes to digital marketplaces. The Romans proved that connectivity breeds prosperity, that when you link people and resources efficiently, civilization leaps forward. Their roads weren't just stone and mortar, they were the first threads in a web of exchange that would eventually span the planet. So the next time you tap your phone to order something from across the world, remember, you're participating in a system the Romans would have understood perfectly. The packaging may be different, but the principle remains unchanged. Build the roads and the world will follow. The Cursus Publicus wasn't just a postal service, it was Rome's beating heart, pumping information across the empire at a pace that left rivals in the dust. Picture this, a rider galloping into a relay station, sweat streaking his face as he thrusts a sealed dispatch into fresh hands. Within moments, another courier sprints out on a rested horse, maintaining a breakneck speed that could cover 50 miles in a single day. This wasn't just mail delivery, it was an ancient version of high-speed internet, where news from the Rhine frontier could reach Emperor Hadrian in Rome faster than most people could travel between neighboring towns. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just the speed, but its military precision. Relay stations called mutations dotted every 8 to 12 miles along major roads close enough that horses could run full tilt without exhaustion. At larger rest stops called mansions, couriers could swap mounts, grab hot meals, or even hand off messages to fresh riders in a seamless baton pass. The imperial treasury funded it all, recognizing that controlling information meant controlling an empire stretching from Scotland to Syria. When rebellion erupted or barbarians crossed the Danube, Rome didn't hear about it weeks later through merchant gossip. They knew within days, and their response was already rolling down those stone highways. The bureaucracy behind it would impress modern logistics companies. Each courier carried a diploma, a bronze passport listing authorized stops and privileges, like free lodging or the right to commandeer fresh horses. Station masters kept detailed ledgers tracking every dispatch, while teams of scribes at major hubs copied messages to multiple riders as redundancy against bandits or accidents. Some routes even had encrypted messages, with officials using wax tablets that could be sealed and stamped to deter prying eyes. This wasn't just communication. It was a finely tuned machine that kept Rome's vast territories feeling closer together than some medieval kingdoms did centuries later. But the Cursus Publicus did more than transmit orders. It shaped how power worked. Provincial governors could consult Rome on decisions in real time, rather than ruling by guesswork. Tax revenues flowed efficiently because collectors knew exactly when and where to expect audits. Even ordinary citizens benefited indirectly, as the system carried census data that helped distribute grain during famines or coordinate disaster relief. The roads had made the empire possible, but this network of galloping messengers made it governable. Its influence echoes in surprising places. Byzantine emperors maintained the system for centuries after Rome's fall, and its structure inspired everything from Mongol horse relays to the Pony Express. The very concept of a state-run postal service traces back to those riders pounding down the Appian Way. Today, when you refresh your email or track a package moving across continents in hours, you're witnessing the latest evolution of an idea Romans perfected. That speed of information isn't just convenient, it's the ultimate leverage in a connected world. The next time you complain about slow Wi-Fi, remember, 2,000 years ago, someone was probably grumbling about a delayed courier outside a mutations in Gaul. When the Roman legions landed on Britain's shores in 43 CE, they didn't just bring swords and shields, they brought an ironclad blueprint for domination, etched in stone and gravel. The conquest of Britain wasn't just won in battles, it was cemented by the roads that sprawled across the countryside like a spider's web. Watling Street, stretching from the Channel coast deep into Wales, and the Fosse Way, cutting diagonally across the island like a surgeon's scalpel, weren't mere pathways. They were instruments of control designed to move troops at lightning speed, suppress rebellions before they could spread, and stitch this wild new province firmly into the fabric of the empire. What's astonishing is how these roads transformed Britain's very landscape. Before Rome, travel here meant slogging through muddy Celtic tracks that twisted around hills and forests. But Roman engineers ignored the terrain's whims. They carved straight lines with ruthless efficiency, bridging rivers like the Thames and tunneling through obstacles with a single-minded purpose: speed. A messenger could race from Londinium to the frontier forts in days, not weeks. Supply wagons rumbled along these routes year-round, ensuring distant garrisons never ran short of food or weapons. And when Boudicca's rebellion erupted in 61 CE, it was along Wattling Street that Roman reinforcements thundered to crush her forces, proof that these roads weren't just infrastructure, they were Rome's lifeline. But the roads did more than shuttle soldiers, they reshaped Britain's identity. Towns sprang up at crossroads, their markets buzzing with goods from across the empire. Bath's famous spas, fed by natural hot springs, became a tourist hotspot for Romans craving a taste of home. Even the local tribes adapted, their leaders building villas along these routes to tap into the booming trade. Latin graffiti scrawled on walls in places like Vindolanda Fort reveals how quickly the language took root, carried not just by officials but by merchants and migrants drawn to these thriving new hubs. The Fossway, originally a military supply line, soon hummed with olive oil amphorae from Spain and glassware from Gaul, luxuries that trickled into even remote villages, weaving Britain into Rome's cosmopolitan world. Today, you can still trace Rome's handiwork beneath modern Britain. The A5 highway shadows Wattling Street's path for miles, while the Fossway lives on as the A46, its arrow-straight alignment baffling drivers who don't realize they're following 2,000-year-old surveys. In Chester, the original Roman walls still stand, their gates opening onto streets laid out by legionary architects. And in London, if you know where to look, you can walk sections of the old Roman road beneath Leadenhall Market, where the grooves of ancient cartwheels are still faintly visible. These aren't just relics, they're active threads in Britain's DNA, shaping everything from property boundaries to pilgrimage routes long after Rome's legions sailed home. The ultimate testament to these roads' power, they outlasted the empire itself. When Rome withdrew in the 5th century, Anglo-Saxon invaders didn't tear up the stones. They used them just as medieval kings and Victorian engineers later would. The routes became trade corridors, then turnpikes, and finally the asphalt arteries of modern Britain. That's the irony. The very roads built to subjugate a conquered people ended up uniting them, creating a network so vital that even Rome's fiercest enemies couldn't imagine life without it. When you drive across Britain today, you're not just following a map, you're retracing the footsteps of legionaries who turned an island of tribes into a single, connected land. If Rome's roads were the veins of its empire, then the Via Augusta was Hispania's mighty aorta, a 1,200-mile lifeline that turned Spain from a rugged frontier into one of Rome's wealthiest provinces. Picture this, a stone ribbon unfurling from the snow-dusted Pyrenees, slicing through olive groves and silver-rich mountains, all the way to the bustling port of Cadiz where ships carried Spanish goods to every corner of the Mediterranean. This wasn't just a road, it was an economic superhighway, its surface worn smooth by the sandals of legionaries, the hooves of mule trains heavy with Andalusian olive oil, and the creaking wheels of carts piled high with silver ingots from the mines of Cartagena. What made the Via Augusta extraordinary wasn't just its length, but how it transformed Spain's destiny. Before Rome, Iberia was a patchwork of warring tribes connected by goat trails. The Via Augusta changed everything. It became the spine that allowed Roman cities like Tarraco and Corduba to flourish, their forums and theaters supplied by goods moving effortlessly along this paved corridor. The road's strategic genius lay in its bridges, like the towering Alcantara crossing the Tagus River, or the delicate arches of the Cordoba aqueduct that paralleled its path. These weren't just feats of engineering, they were declarations that Rome had come to stay. Today, you can still feel the Via Augusta's pulse beneath modern Spain. The N4 highway clings to its original route for miles, passing Roman milestones that now stand like silent sentinels beside gas stations and rest stops. In Seville, the Cal Marmols follows the exact alignment of the ancient road, its name a nod to the marble columns that once lined it. Even Spain's famous pilgrimage route, the Camino de Santiago, borrows stretches of the Via Augusta, proof that when Rome built something, it wasn't just for their century, but for all the centuries to come. But the road's true legacy lies in what it carried beyond goods. Along its length, Roman villas sprouted like mushrooms after rain, their mosaic floors telling stories of newfound wealth. Latin took root in towns that had never heard the language, while local gods like Endovelicus found themselves sharing altars with Jupiter and Minerva. The Via Augusta didn't just move silver, it moved cultures blending Iberian, Roman, and later Visigothic traditions into the rich tapestry that would become modern Spain. Perhaps no cargo was more transformative than the road's most invisible export, ideas. Roman law traveled these stones, as did new farming techniques that turned arid plains into fertile fields. When Seneca journeyed from Corduba to Rome to become an emperor's tutor, or when Trajan, born along the Via Augusta in Italica, rose to lead the empire itself, they were proof that this road didn't just connect places, it launched destinies. 2,000 years later, as trucks rumble down the Superhighway tracing the same path, the Via Augusta's lesson endures: build roads that outlast empires, and they'll shape the world long after the builders are gone. The fall of Rome in the 5th century didn't mark the end of its roads, it revealed something far more remarkable: their ability to transcend the empire itself. As the Western Empire crumbled under invasions and political chaos, the roads faced neglect, their carefully laid stones buried under dirt or swallowed by forests. Yet many refused to disappear. Without legions to maintain them, these pathways became something new, threads of continuity in a fractured world, quietly waiting for the next chapter of history to walk upon them. Medieval pilgrims were among the first to rediscover their value. When Christianity spread across Europe, routes like the Via Francigena, once a Roman military road, became sacred highways for travelers heading to Rome or Jerusalem. Imagine weary pilgrims trudging along the same stones that had once carried Caesar's messengers, now following the footsteps of saints. Monasteries sprung up along these routes, offering shelter just as Roman mansions once had. The roads didn't just survive, they adapted, their purpose shifting from conquest to spiritual journey. Traders kept them alive too. While Roman centralization collapsed, local commerce never stopped. The Via Appia, now layered with centuries of grime, still guided merchants hauling grain from Campania to Rome's diminished markets. In Britain, the Fosse became a lifeline for Saxon traders moving wool and pottery between emerging kingdoms. These roads were no longer imperial tools, they were the veins of a patchwork Europe, connecting villages and markets that had once been outposts of a vast empire. Even the Crusaders relied on them. When knights marched east to reclaim the Holy Land in the 11th century, many followed Roman roads like the Via Egnatia across the Balkans. Its sturdy bridges and leveled passes made it the obvious choice, just as it had been for Roman legions 1,000 years earlier. The road's durability became their greatest legacy, outlasting emperors, surviving plagues, and even weathering the collapse of the very civilization that built them. What's truly astonishing is how deeply these routes shaped Europe's future. When Charlemagne rebuilt his empire in the 8th century, he didn't start from scratch. He restored Roman roads to unite his realm. Centuries later, Napoleon's engineers would survey these same paths when planning their own campaigns. And today, if you trace the Autobahn in Germany or the A1 in England, you're often driving over roads that began as Roman surveys. The empire fell, but its roads became the skeleton of a continent, quietly reminding us that some ideas are too strong to disappear. The medieval world may have turned its back on Rome's glory, but it never abandoned its roads. As empires fractured into kingdoms and dukedoms, Those ancient stone pathways became the silent scaffolding holding Europe together. Take the Via Francigena. Once a military route for Roman troops marching north, it transformed into the primary pilgrimage highway to Rome during the Middle Ages. Canterbury's Archbishop Sigeric left us a remarkable diary in 990 CE, detailing his journey along this very road. 79 stops from England to Rome, each a day's walk apart, following the same stations Roman couriers had used centuries earlier. This wasn't nostalgia, it was practicality. Why blaze new trails when perfectly good ones already existed? What's fascinating is how these roads shaped medieval life beyond travel. Their straight, unyielding lines became property boundaries, with fields and villages aligning to them like iron filings to a magnet. In England, the Fossway's rigid geometry influenced the famous strip field systems, where long, narrow plots mirrored the road's linear precision. French vineyards along the Via Aquitania still follow planting rows that echo the original Roman survey lines. These roads didn't just connect places, they imprinted an orderly Roman mindset onto the medieval landscape, centuries after the last legion departed. Religious orders became the new caretakers of this legacy. Monasteries like Cluny in France or Monte Cassino in Italy strategically positioned themselves along old Roman routes, offering sanctuary to travelers just as mansions once had. The roads even shaped sacred architecture. Pilgrimage churches like Santiago de Compostela were designed with long naves to accommodate crowds arriving via Roman roads. And when relic markets boomed in the 12th century, merchants transporting holy bones always preferred these ancient highways for their reliability. Trade flourished in unexpected ways too. The Via della Lana in Italy, built by Romans for military transport, became the backbone of Europe's wool trade. At Stourbridge Fair near Cambridge, held annually on the old Roman Ermine Street, merchants from Flanders to Florence gathered to trade goods along the same route their ancestors had marched as legionaries. The roads even birthed new industries. Blacksmiths who once shoed Roman horses now crafted pilgrim badges, while former mutations evolved into full-fledged market towns like Augusta in the Alps. Perhaps the most poignant adaptation was how these roads kept Roman knowledge alive. Medieval scholars traveling to universities in Bologna or Paris followed Roman roads, unknowingly retracing the steps of ancient engineers. When Gothic cathedrals rose in the 12th century, their builders used Roman roads to transport stone, sometimes pillaging old Roman structures for materials, but always relying on those unshakable foundations. Even Charlemagne's imperial revival in the 8th century depended on restoring key Roman routes to connect his scattered territories, the ultimate testament to their endurance. Modern Europe's DNA still follows these ancient lines. The Autostrada del Sole in Italy overlays the Via Cassia. London's Oxford Street began as a Roman road to Silchester. And when engineers first mapped Europe's railway network in the 19th century, they frequently chose Roman road alignments for their efficiency. These pathways refused to fade because they represented something timeless, not just Roman engineering, but the fundamental human need to connect. The Middle Ages didn't inherit dead relics. They received living infrastructure that continued to shape history long after its builders had turned to dust. The Renaissance didn't just revive art and philosophy, it unearthed Rome's engineering genius from the dust of forgotten manuscripts. In 15th century Florence, scholars pored over rediscovered texts like Vitruvius's De Architectura, their fingers tracing diagrams of Roman road construction with the same reverence others reserved for Plato. These weren't just historical curiosities. They were instruction manuals for a Europe waking from the medieval fog. When Leon Battista Alberti penned his own architectural treatise in 1452, He didn't just admire Roman roads, he dissected them, marveling at their graded foundations and cambered surfaces, and declared them the model for modern infrastructure. What followed was a quiet revolution in city planning. Popes and princes, eager to echo Rome's grandeur, commissioned roads that mimicked the ancient prototypes. In Rome itself, the Via Papale was rebuilt with meticulous attention to Roman techniques, its new surface mirroring the Appian Way's layered stability. Venetian engineers studying the Via Claudia Augusta adapted its drainage systems to combat their lagoon city's perennial floods. Even the humble cobblestones of Siena's streets owed their precise placement to municipal architects who'd studied Roman pavements. This wasn't mere imitation, it was a dialogue across centuries where Renaissance innovators refined Roman principles with new materials and mathematical precision. The road's influence stretched far beyond Italy. When Francis Louis Roman XII ordered the renovation of the Route de Lyon in 1508, his engineers blended Roman surveying methods with improved paving stones to create what became Europe's premier postal route. In Germany, Albrecht Dürer sketched Roman milestones during his Italian travels, later incorporating their proportional harmony into his own designs for fortified towns. The past wasn't just being remembered, it was being reverse-engineered, with Renaissance thinkers recognizing that Rome's roads weren't relics, but timeless templates for efficiency. Perhaps the most transformative impact was on bridge design. Studying Rome's segmental arches like those still standing on the Ponte Sant'Angelo, engineers realized the superiority of rounded arches over medieval pointed ones. This epiphany birthed masterpieces like Florence's Ponte Santa Trinita, where elegance met durability in a distinctly Roman fashion. Even Da Vinci, that quintessential Renaissance polymath, filled notebooks with sketches of Roman viaducts, their arches inspiring his visionary, if unrealized, plans for ideal cities. Yet the true legacy of this rediscovery lies in how it reshaped Europe's mindset. Those rutted medieval tracks, once seen as inevitable, were now viewed as problems to be solved. Roman roads became proof that human ingenuity could tame geography itself, a belief that fueled later wonders like Napoleon's highways and even the birth of modern civil engineering. When you walk the polished flagstones of Rome's Piazza Navona today, remember, you're treading on a Renaissance reinterpretation of an ancient idea, one that still whispers that progress doesn't always mean inventing anew. Sometimes it means remembering what worked. Napoleon's conquests reshaped Europe, but his greatest strategic insight wasn't original. It was borrowed from engineers who'd been dead for 15 centuries. While other generals focused on tactics or weaponry, Napoleon fixated on something far more foundational: roads, not just any roads, but highways built with Roman precision, designed to move armies at speeds that left enemies paralyzed. His famous Route Napoleon, stretching 250 miles from Gulf Juan to Grenoble during the 100 Days campaign, wasn't a new invention, it was a carbon copy of Roman principles, with wide, straight sections and carefully graded slopes that allowed his artillery to advance 30 miles a day. What fascinated Napoleon wasn't just the road's durability, but their psychological impact. Roman engineers had understood that straight roads did more than save time. They projected unstoppable momentum. A legion appearing on the horizon days before expected could shatter an enemy's morale. Napoleon applied this ruthlessly, using his core system of independent divisions that could march separately but unite rapidly along these revived Roman routes. When he invaded Italy in 1796, his troops moved along the Via Aurelia and Via Cassia, their boots echoing those of Julius Caesar's legions. The effect was identical. Local defenders, accustomed to slow-moving Austrian armies, found themselves outflanked before they could organize resistance. The emperor's obsession went beyond mimicry. He established France's first modern highway administration, the Ponts et Chaussées, explicitly modeled on Rome's Curatus Virum, the ancient officials responsible for road maintenance. His engineers pored over Roman surveying manuals, adopting their techniques for drainage and foundation layers. Even his famous habit of planting trees along roadsides had Roman precedent, providing shade just as the empire had done for marching legions. Napoleon didn't just use Roman roads, he reverse-engineered an entire system of control, recognizing that whoever mastered mobility mastered Europe. The ultimate tribute came in his urban planning. Paris's Rue de Rivoli, with its uniform arcades and precise symmetry, consciously echoed Rome's Via Sacra. When redesigning the French capital, Napoleon insisted on straight, wide boulevards not just for beauty, but to prevent barricades during uprisings and allow rapid troop movements. This was Roman urban warfare strategy updated for the age of cannons, proving that the empire's infrastructure lessons transcended technological change. Perhaps the most telling detail lies in Napoleon's downfall. During his retreat from Moscow in 1812, his Grand Armée disintegrated not just from cold and hunger, but because Russia lacked proper roads. Without Roman-style highways to speed his withdrawal, the once invincible force bogged down in mud, a brutal lesson in what happens when conquerors ignore the infrastructure that built empires. The irony: Napoleon's final exile was on St. Helena, an island without a single paved road. The man who spent his career emulating Rome's mastery of mobility spent his last years trapped in place, a prisoner of geography in a way no Roman general would have tolerated. Germany's Autobahn didn't emerge from a vacuum. It was born from a 2,000-year-old playbook. When Hitler's engineers began constructing the world's first high-speed highway network in the 1930s, they didn't just innovate, they inherited. Those sweeping curves and meticulous gradients mirrored Roman roads so precisely that archaeologists later found stretches where modern asphalt overlay original Roman stones. The Autobahn's secret wasn't just its lack of speed limits, but its foundation: layered concrete, crowned surfaces for drainage, and straight alignments that minimized travel time, all hallmarks of engineering perfected by legionaries with chisels and plumb lines. America's interstate system took the lesson further. When Eisenhower launched the largest public works project in U.S. history in 1956, he didn't hide his inspiration. As a young officer, he'd witnessed Nazi troops exploiting the Autobahn, but more crucially, he'd marveled at Roman roads during World War II's Italian campaign. The result: highways like I-70, slicing through the Rockies with Roman-esque tunnels, and I-10's elevated sections across Louisiana swamps, echoing the pilings that once stabilized roads in Rome's marshlands. Even the interstate's numbering system owes a debt. Odd-numbered routes run north-south like the Via Appia, while even ones stretch east-west like the Via Augusta, a subconscious nod to imperial logic. What's often overlooked is how Roman principles solved modern problems. Take drainage. Contemporary highways use porous asphalt to prevent hydroplaning, but the concept is pure Roman. Their roads' cambered surfaces shed water just as effectively. Or consider rest stops. The service plazas dotting interstates function exactly like mutations, offering fuel and food at predictable intervals. Even the materials tell a story. Roman concrete mixed with volcanic ash self-healed cracks over time. Today's engineers are finally catching up, developing bacteria-infused concrete that repairs itself, proof that antiquity's solutions still outpace modern assumptions. The real legacy lies in the philosophy behind these roads. Rome understood that infrastructure isn't just about convenience, it's about unity. The interstates didn't merely connect cities, they standardized America, allowing dialects, cultures, and commerce to blend as seamlessly as they once did across the Mediterranean. When you drive from New York to Los Angeles without stopping at a single traffic light, you're experiencing the same unbroken connectivity that let a merchant in Roman Gaul ship wine to Syria without changing carts. Perhaps the most poetic example hides in plain sight. Next time you pass a highway construction crew, watch their process. Surveyors stake alignments, graders level foundations, and rollers compact layers. The exact sequence Roman crews followed, just with diesel instead of oxen. The tools evolved, but the blueprint remains. From the Autobahn's precision to the interstate sprawl, every modern highway whispers the same truth: we're still building Rome. The vehicles change, the speeds increase, but the road beneath us, that's eternal. Beneath the rolling hills of Devon, England, a team of archaeologists recently uncovered something extraordinary: a stretch of Roman road hidden for centuries under layers of soil and grass. This wasn't just any path. Its carefully laid stones and precise alignment revealed a forgotten artery of empire, one that once connected remote outposts to the bustling heart of Roman Britain. What's remarkable isn't just the discovery itself, but how it was found, not with shovels alone, but with lasers scanning from the sky and radar pulses piercing the earth. Modern technology is giving us X-ray vision into the past, and what it's showing us is rewriting history. LiDAR light detection and ranging works like a high-tech broom, digitally sweeping away forests and fields to expose the ghosts of ancient roads. In Hungary's Zemplén Mountains, this airborne laser mapping revealed a network of Roman highways snaking through terrain once thought impassable. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar sends electromagnetic pulses into the earth, painting pictures of buried stones and ditches without moving a single clod of dirt. In Italy's Po Valley, these radio waves uncovered a lost section of the Via Ania, its route preserved like a fossil beneath farmland. Each scan, each ping of returning data, is a whisper from the past telling us where to look next. But the real magic happens when technology meets old-fashioned digging. In Devon, after LiDAR pinpointed the road's potential path, archaeologists carefully peeled back the earth to find something astonishing: cart ruts worn deep into the stone, grooves so precise they could only have been made by centuries of iron-rimmed wheels. Nearby, they uncovered coins from the reign of Emperor Hadrian and pottery, shards from Gaul, silent witnesses to the vibrant trade that once flowed here. These aren't just artifacts, they're time capsules, proving that what we thought was empty countryside was actually a bustling corridor of Roman life. The stories these roads tell go far beyond engineering. In Germany's Eifel region, a rediscovered stretch of the Via Belgica revealed mile markers carved with the names of long-dead officials, a bureaucratic paper trail in stone. In Spain, a buried section of the Via Augusta yielded horse skeletons with shoes still intact, evidence of the relay stations that kept Rome's messengers moving at breakneck speed. Even the absence of roads speaks volumes. In Scotland's Highlands, the lack of Roman highways explains why the empire never truly conquered the north. Some landscapes resisted even Rome's iron will. What's emerging is a map far more intricate than historians imagined. These weren't just to-be routes, they were a living network, adapting to terrain, politics, and even local customs. Some British roads followed prehistoric Celtic tracks, while in North Africa, Roman engineers incorporated Phoenician trade routes into their designs. Every discovery chips away at the myth of Roman roads as monotonous straight lines. They curved when needed, climbed when necessary, and sometimes dead-ended at the edge of empire, marking the limits of Rome's reach. The most thrilling part: we've barely scratched the surface. Less than half of Rome's estimated 50,000 miles of roads have been definitively mapped, and new technologies are revealing lost sections faster than ever. With drones, satellite imagery, and AI-assisted analysis joining the toolkit, archaeologists are poised to uncover roads we didn't even know existed. Each one will add another piece to the puzzle, not just of how Rome moved, but how it thought, ruled, and ultimately shaped the world we live in today. The next time you walk through a field or hike a country lane, remember, beneath your feet, history might be waiting. Hollywood has long understood the cinematic power of Roman roads, those sweeping stone avenues that seem to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Think of Gladiator's opening battle, where the camera glides over a rain-slicked road in Germania, its weathered stones gleaming under torchlight as legions march toward destiny. Or Ben-Hur's iconic chariot race, where the dust-choked track mirrors the Via Appia's brutal grandeur. These aren't just backdrops, they're silent characters, embodying the Empire's relentless reach. Game designers lean into this same symbolism in Assassin's Creed Origins. Players traverse Egypt along Roman roads that pulse with life, from merchants' carts to patrolling soldiers, every pixel echoing history's hum. What makes these virtual and cinematic roads so compelling is their duality. They represent both order and oppression, the meticulous engineering that unified continents, but also the iron grip that built them. Spartacus, Blood and Sand dramatizes this tension perfectly, showing slaves breaking rock under the scorching sun to construct the very roads that will tighten Rome's control over them. Meanwhile, the Eagle captures the haunting isolation of these pathways as a lone soldier treks Britain's crumbling highways, their stones whispering of lost glory. Even children's media like Asterix plays with this legacy, parodying Roman roads as absurdly straight lines that Gauls gleefully disrupt. Beyond screens, these roads fuel our collective imagination in subtler ways. Tourist boards market walking tours along the Appian Way as time travel, while reenactors in full legionnaire gear march down reconstructed stretches for Instagram snaps. Tabletop games like Catan incorporate Roman road mechanics, rewarding players who build the longest connected routes, a playful nod to history's original networkers. Novelists from Robert Harris to Lindsay Davis set pivotal scenes at roadside inns or mile markers, where chance encounters spark intrigue. Every retelling, whether gritty or glamorous, reinforces one truth: these roads aren't relics. They're mirrors reflecting our own world's tangled themes of connection and control. The most fascinating adaptations come when artists blend fact with speculation. Pompeii's lava-strewn streets show roads as both escape routes and death traps during the eruption. Video game Total War, Rome Roman 2 lets players strategize supply lines along historically accurate routes, learning through play how logistics won empires. Even music videos like Bastile's Pompeii use cobbled Roman streets as metaphors for unstoppable forces, whether volcanic or viral. Each interpretation, no matter how stylized, taps into that primal recognition. When we see those ancient stones, we're not just looking at history. We're seeing the blueprint of every highway, fiber optic cable, and flight path that keeps our world linked today. Perhaps the ultimate testament to their cultural staying power is how often we reinvent them. Modern military dramas frame highways as strategic assets, just as Rome did. Fantasy epics like Game of Thrones model their King's Road on Roman precedents: wide, guarded, and vital to power. And when sci-fi imagines Martian colonies, guess what their transit grids resemble? Raised, cambered pathways that would make a Roman engineer nod in approval. These roads endure in our stories because they answer a timeless question: how do we hold the world together? Rome's solution was stone and sweat. Ours might be asphalt or hyperloops, but the dream remains the same. The Roman road wasn't just a path, it was a promise carved in stone. Every perfectly laid mile whispered the same message. Wherever these stones reached, Rome ruled. This wasn't merely infrastructure, it was ideology made tangible, the physical embodiment of an empire's unshakable will. When engineers surveyed a new route through hostile territory, they weren't just plotting a course, they were drawing a line between civilization and chaos, between the ordered world of the empire and the untamed lands beyond. The road's famous straightness wasn't just practical, it was symbolic, demonstrating Rome's refusal to yield to nature's obstacles any more than it would to rebellious tribes. Consider the milestones that dotted every Roman highway. These weren't simple distance markers, they were imperial press releases carved in granite. Many bore the names of emperors and officials who commissioned them, turning each mile into a political advertisement. Travelers couldn't move 10 paces without being reminded who built the road beneath their feet and who expected their taxes in return. Even the Latin word for road, via, carried deeper meaning, sharing its root with viator, traveler, and vita, life, linguistically binding movement to existence itself under Roman terms. The roads also served as cultural arteries, pumping Roman identity into every province. Local elites quickly learned that building villas along these routes meant access to luxury goods, political influence, and Roman citizenship. Children growing up near these highways heard Latin spoken daily by merchants and officials, saw Roman fashions on passing travelers, and developed tastes for foods like olives and wine that rolled in on those same stone paths. Resistance wasn't just military, it was existential. Tribes that held out against Rome often found their young men returning from roadside markets with new ideas, their chieftain's authority undermined by the seductive pull of Roman ways. Yet the most profound symbolism lay in the road's permanence. While empires rose and fell, these pathways endured sometimes for centuries after Rome's collapse. Medieval kings held coronation processions down Roman roads to borrow their legitimacy. Pilgrims followed them to holy sites, believing the stones themselves carried divine favor. Even today, when European leaders inaugurate new transport projects, they consciously echo Roman imagery. The EU's trans-European transport networks explicitly modeled on Rome's highway system. The roads became more than imperial tools. They transformed into universal symbols of connection that outlasted their creators. Perhaps the final irony is how these instruments of control became conduits of change. The same roads that carried legions to crush rebellions later carried Christian missionaries to convert the empire. The pathways built to spread Latin eventually carried vernacular languages that would displace it. And the stones laid to proclaim Roma Invicta now stand as monuments to a fallen empire, their very endurance proving that nothing, not even Rome, lasts forever. The next time you walk an ancient Roman road, remember, you're not just standing on history, you're standing on the physical manifestation of an idea. That unity can be paved one stone at a time. Preservation teams armed with laser scanners and 3D printers are waging a quiet revolution to save Rome's crumbling highways. Along England's Watling Street, conservators inject nanosilica into cracked stones, a space-age solution mimicking the self-healing properties of ancient Roman concrete. In Tunisia, archaeologists use drone mapping to track erosion gnawing at the edges of the Via Africa, where centuries of wind and sand threaten to erase ruts carved by legionary sandals. These aren't just repair jobs, they're rescue missions for the very fabric of history. The challenges read like an Indiana Jones script meets urban planning nightmare. Near Rome's Porta San Sebastiano, vibrations from modern traffic shake loose stones laid when Caesar ruled. In Spain's Tarragona, a Roman bridge that survived Visigoths and Moors now buckles under the weight of Instagram tourists posing for selfies. Even climate change plays the villain. Rising groundwater in Pompeii's streets dissolves mortar that's held for 2 millennia. Preservationists counter with ingenious fixes: shock-absorbing titanium rods beneath flagstones, AI models predicting which sections will crumble next, even transplanting entire road segments into climate-controlled museums when outdoor survival becomes impossible. What's at stake isn't just stone, but the stories they carry. When conservators lifted a paving slab on the Appian Way in 2019, they found fingerprints pressed into the mortar, some soldier's accidental signature from 300 BC. Nearby, grooves from chariot wheels trace precise paths of ancient traffic patterns, while worn patches reveal where generations paused to rest. Digital archivists now laser scan these details down to millimeter accuracy, creating virtual roads that will outlast their physical counterparts. The British Museum's latest exhibit lets visitors walk a holographic Roman road wearing VR headsets, feeling the texture of stones through haptic feedback gloves. Local communities have become unexpected allies in this fight. In Portugal's Trás-os-Montes region, villagers mix traditional lime mortar to repair their stretch of the Via Roman 17, passing down techniques unchanged since their ancestors maintained it for Roman officials. Italian schoolchildren adopt sections of the Via Flaminia, scrubbing moss from milestones as class projects. Even road crews get involved when German construction workers uncovered a pristine Roman highway beneath Autobahn 6 near Cologne. They immediately halted work and called archaeologists. Their discovery, a 1600-year-old service station complete with horse stalls and a blacksmith's forge, now preserved beneath a glass viewing platform at the rest stop. The ultimate test lies in balancing past and present. Some solutions are elegantly simple. Belgium rerouted a planned bike path to preserve the Via Belgica's original stones, while Jordan incorporated a Roman highway into its modern desert highway system, marking the ancient route with subtle LED lighting. Other debates rage on. Should engineers repave the Appian Way for accessibility, or let its uneven stones remain as time made them? Can drone deliveries replace tourist buses, damaging the Via Sacra? Every decision carries weight, for as one conservator in Lyon told me while painstakingly resetting a mile marker, we're not just fixing roads, we're keeping conversations alive between generations who'll never meet. The true measure of success won't be in museum plaques or UNESCO listings, but in whether 2,000 years from now, someone else can still place their hand where yours now rests, on stones that refuse to let time have the last word. Walking along the Appian Way today feels less like a hike and more like stepping into a time machine. The moment your shoes touch those worn basalt stones, some still bearing the grooves of chariot wheels, you become part of an unbroken chain stretching back to the days of Cicero and Caesar. This isn't just a scenic trail, it's a living museum where every step echoes with history. Families with picnic baskets pass ancient tombs draped in ivy, cyclists weave between millennia-old milestones, and the occasional horse-drawn carriage clatters by, its wooden wheels spinning at the same leisurely pace they did 2,000 years ago. The air smells of pine and earth, unchanged since legionnaires marched here with eagles held high. For those craving a wilder experience, Hadrian's Wall Path in northern England offers a different kind of time travel. Trekking this 84-mile national trail means striding along the empire's northern frontier, where Roman sentries once shivered in watchtowers, scanning the misty moors for Pictish raiders. Today, sheep graze where barracks once stood, and the wind carries whispers of Latin commands long faded into the turf. What's astonishing is how little the landscape has changed: the same rolling hills, the same unpredictable drizzle, even the same stubborn thistles that probably snagged Roman cloaks. Walk far enough and you'll stumble upon Vindolanda, where archaeologists still uncover letters written on birch bark by homesick soldiers. One fragment complains about the British weather in such relatable terms you'll laugh. Some gripes truly are timeless. Spain's Via de la Plata serves up a sun-baked alternative. Starting in Seville, this ancient silver route unfurls like a stone ribbon through olive groves and Roman ruins. In Mérida, you can pause at a bridge so perfectly preserved its arches still reflect in the Guadiana River, just as they did when traders hauled Andalusian silver to Rome. The real magic happens at dusk when the warm light turns the stones gold and the ghosts feel close enough to touch. Locals call it La Hora Romana, the Roman hour when the past doesn't seem past at all. What makes these walks extraordinary isn't just the ruins or the scenery, it's the intimacy of the connection. When your fingers trace the same grooves in a milestone that a merchant from Gaul once touched, or when your shadow falls across a paving stone worn smooth by countless sandals before yours, history stops being abstract. You're not reading about the Roman world, you're inhabiting it, breathing its air, feeling its textures underfoot. And if you listen closely, to the wind in the cypress trees along the Appian Way, to the cry of a buzzard circling Hadrian's Wall, you might just hear the faintest echo of hobnailed boots and turning cartwheels, a reminder that these roads were never just stone. They were, and still are, the pulse of a civilization that refuses to be forgotten. The sands of North Africa hide one of Rome's most astonishing engineering feats, a web of roads so resilient they defied the desert itself. While the Appian Way and Hadrian's Wall dominate the spotlight, routes like the Via Nova Traiana in Jordan whisper a different story. Rome didn't just conquer landscapes, it tamed them. Stretching from the Red Sea port of Ayla to the Syrian frontier, this highway wasn't merely a path, it was a lifeline carved through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Imagine legions marching under a blistering sun, their sandals kicking up dust as they followed mile markers inscribed with Trajan's name, each one a defiant declaration that even the desert answered to Rome. What made these roads extraordinary wasn't their grandeur, but their adaptability. In places where water was scarcer than gold, engineers built catch basins to channel flash floods into reservoirs, ensuring travelers and their animals wouldn't perish of thirst. The surface itself was a masterclass in improvisation instead of stone slabs. Many sections used compacted gravel mixed with lime, creating a surface that stayed firm under the desert's extreme heat. Bridges arched over dry wadis, their arches designed to withstand sudden torrents when rare rains came. This wasn't just construction, it was a dialogue with nature, where Roman pragmatism met the desert's whims and won. The Via Nova Traiana's true power lay in what it connected. Desert forts like Udra and Humaima, once isolated specks on the map, became bustling hubs where Nabatean traders, Roman soldiers, and Bedouin herders crossed paths. At Petra, the road merged with ancient incense routes, turning the rose-red city into a cultural crossroads where Roman law, Greek art, and Arab traditions blended seamlessly. Even the road's ghost towns tell stories. Abandoned way stations, still littered with pottery shards and camel bones, hint at the vibrant commerce that once pulsed here. But perhaps the most striking legacy lies beneath the modern landscape. In Jordan's Wadi Rum, sections of the Via Nova Traiana still trace their original route, their outlines visible from satellite imagery like faint scars on the earth. Local Bedouin tribes who have navigated these sands for centuries call them the paths of the ancients, using them as guides during migrations. Modern highways often shadow these ancient tracks, their engineers unknowingly following blueprints drawn by Roman surveyors 2,000 years prior. The lesson of these desert roads isn't just about endurance, it's about vision. While other empires saw wastelands, Rome saw opportunity. Its engineers didn't just build roads, they built capillaries of civilization in places others deemed uninhabitable. Today, when you see a pipeline crossing the Sahara or a highway threading through the Arabian desert, remember, you're witnessing the latest chapter in a story Rome began, one stone at a time. The desert may erase kingdoms, but it couldn't erase those roads. They remain, as Trajan intended them to be, proof that ambition, when paired with ingenuity, can outlast even the sands of time. The same stone highways that carried Roman legions to crush rebellions would soon carry a far different kind of conqueror missionaries armed not with swords, but with scrolls and stories of resurrection. When Paul of Tarsus set out on his fateful journeys across the Eastern Empire, he didn't blaze new trails. He walked the well-worn grooves of Roman engineering, from the marble-paved streets of Corinth to the bustling ports linked by the Via Egnatia. These roads, built to tighten Rome's grip on its territories, became the unexpected arteries of a spiritual revolution. A Roman centurion could march from Jerusalem to Damascus in 6 days. Paul made the same trip fleeing persecution, then later retraced his steps as Christianity's most tireless evangelist, proof that infrastructure designed for control could also become a tool of liberation. What's striking isn't just that early Christians used these roads, but how perfectly the network suited their needs. Major highways like the Via Appia connected urban hubs where synagogues and philosophical schools provided ready audiences for debate. Way stations offered safe havens for overnight stays, allowing Paul to weave his tent-making trade with preaching, a mobile ministry model that depended entirely on Roman logistics. The roads even shaped Christian symbolism. Jesus' declaration, "I am the way," would have resonated deeply with travelers who knew the life-changing power of a reliable path. And when Paul wrote to the church in Rome, his letter traveled the very road he longed to walk, carried by merchants or imperial couriers who unwittingly delivered the seeds of a faith that would outlast their empire. The physical evidence still whispers of this unlikely alliance between conqueror and convert. In Thessaloniki, ruts worn by Roman carts lead straight to the ruins of a first-century basilica. Beneath Rome's Basilica of San Sebastiano, catacombs line the Appian Way where pilgrims once clustered to honor martyrs. Even the milestones took on new meaning where emperors once proclaimed their glory. Christians discreetly scratched fish symbols, turning instruments of imperial propaganda into secret signposts for the faithful. Yet the road's greatest gift to Christianity was speed. Where pagan cults might take generations to spread, news of Christ's resurrection raced along Roman highways at nearly 50 miles a day, the pace of imperial messengers. By the time Constantine legalized Christianity in 313 CE, the faith had already reached Britain, Gaul, and North Africa, its growth turbocharged by the same infrastructure that once served Jupiter and Mars. The Via Augusta carried bishops to councils, the Via Flaminia ferried relics to new shrines, and the Via Dolorosa itself, though not a Roman construction, became a pilgrimage route only because Rome's broader network made such journeys possible. The irony is profound. Roads built to sustain an empire that crucified Christ became the means by which his followers conquered Rome itself. When Theodosius made Christianity the state religion in 380 CE, the very highways that had carried persecutors like Nero's agents now bore triumphant processions of bishops. The stones remained the same, but their purpose had transformed, from binding an empire with iron to uniting it with something far more enduring. Today, when pilgrims walk the Appian Way to visit the catacombs of Calixtus or trace Paul's steps in Turkey, they're walking proof that even the mightiest works of human ambition can be repurposed for ends their builders never imagined. The Roman road didn't just lead to Rome, it led to a world remade. Latin didn't just spread across the Roman Empire, it rode in on the backs of wagons, marched with legionaries, and whispered through market stalls lining those stone highways. Every milestone planted along the Via Augusta, every tavern sign on the Via Flaminia, every legal decree posted at crossroads became another thread weaving Latin into the fabric of conquered lands. This wasn't a gradual drift of words, it was a linguistic tidal wave propelled by the sheer necessity of communication in an interconnected world. Imagine a Gaulish merchant haggling over olive oil prices with a Roman supplier without shared language, commerce stalled. A Dacian farmer paying taxes to a Latin-speaking official, a Syrian sailor deciphering harbor regulations. All these daily interactions turned roads into rivers of language, carrying Latin far beyond Italy's borders. What's remarkable isn't just that Latin spread, but how it adapted. Along the Via Domitia in southern France, local Celtic dialects blended with Latin to create the earliest forms of Occitan, while in Iberia, the Via Augusta carried Latin that would later evolve into Spanish and Portuguese. The roads didn't just transport words, they became linguistic laboratories where Latin fused with indigenous tongues. Milestones and road markers served as the empire's first language lessons, their inscriptions offering visible, standardized spelling and grammar to regions that had never written their own languages. Even curses scratched into roadside tavern walls by bored soldiers like those found at Vindolanda Fort in Britain show Latin seeping into everyday speech, misspellings and all. The real transformation happened in the road's shadow in the bustling towns that sprouted at intersections. Take Lugdunum, modern Lyon, where the Rhone and Saône rivers met the Via Agrippa. This wasn't just a trading hub, it became a linguistic pressure cooker where Latin, Greek, and Gallic collided. Schools sprang up to teach local elites the language of power, while street vendors picked up practical phrases to sell wares to passing soldiers. Over generations, children in these towns grew up bilingual, then trilingual, their native tongues absorbing Latin like sponges. The roads made this possible. By connecting isolated regions, they turned fragmented dialects into cohesive Romance languages. Today, we hear Rome's linguistic legacy in every she of Spanish, every we of French, every sim of Portuguese. These aren't just descendants of Latin, they're living records of which provinces had the heaviest Roman traffic. Sardinia's remote mountain villages, bypassed by major roads, still speak a Latin closer to Cicero's than Italian. Meanwhile, Romanian, though surrounded by Slavic languages, retains Latin's skeleton because the Via Traiana once threaded like a steel spine through the Balkans. Even English, a Germanic tongue at its core, owes a third of its vocabulary to Latin, much of it arriving via Roman roads repurposed by medieval traders and scholars. The ultimate proof lies in the words we still use for the roads themselves. Street comes from Latin strata, paved road, via survives in voyage, and even mile traces back to mil passus, the Roman 1,000-pace distance markers. These linguistic fossils remind us that language isn't just spoken, it's walked, traded, and built into the stones beneath our feet. When you order a cappuccino in Paris or a pizza in Buenos Aires, you're tasting the long afterlife of those ancient highways, proof that Rome's greatest export wasn't marble or wine, but the very way we shape our thoughts into words. The gleaming stone highways that unified the Roman Empire carried more than soldiers and olive oil. They became invisible pipelines for devastation. When troops returned from crushing a rebellion in Mesopotamia in 165 CE, they brought an unwelcome stowaway, the Antonine Plague. This unseen killer, likely smallpox or measles, raced along the empire's roads with terrifying efficiency, following supply routes from army camps to bustling ports, from merchant caravans to crowded tenements. Within months, the disease had leaped from the eastern frontier to Rome itself, then fanned outward like wildfire along the Via Appia and Via Flaminia. Contemporary accounts describe cities where funeral pyres burned night and day, and corpses piled up faster than they could be buried. The roads built to sustain life now accelerated death, proving that connectivity came with a terrible price. Human suffering took other forms along these engineered paths. The same highways that transported marble for imperial monuments also carried chains for the enslaved laborers who built them. Prisoners from conquered territories like Dacia and Britannia were marched hundreds of miles in shackles to work in quarries or maintain the very roads that had facilitated their capture. Archaeological finds reveal the brutal reality: iron slave collars with inscriptions promising rewards for capture, unearthed near roadside inns where human cargo was bought and sold. Even the celebrated Appian Way, lined with its grand mausoleums, was constructed in part by enslaved workers whose names history never recorded. The roads symbolized unity for some, but for others, they were ribbons of bondage stretching endlessly toward an unforgiving horizon. The economic engine these roads powered had equally dark gears. Mines along the Via Augusta in Spain, connected to markets by flawless Roman engineering, relied on workers laboring in conditions so horrific that historian Diodorus Siculus described them as living corpses. Silver extracted by their hands flowed smoothly to Rome, polished by the very roads that made their exploitation profitable. In North Africa, vast olive plantations supplied the empire's insatiable demand for oil, their produce whisked to ports on roads built by conscripted local labor. The system was ruthlessly efficient. Rome's highways didn't just move goods, they institutionalized inequality, ensuring wealth flowed upward while the costs were borne by the invisible many. Yet the most unsettling legacy might be how these roads reshaped entire ecosystems. Deforestation accelerated as timber was harvested to fuel roadside foundries and heat the baths that dotted major routes. Marshes were drained for agriculture to feed travelers, disrupting delicate wetlands. Even wildlife patterns changed. Wolves learned to follow roads to scavenge from waste-station garbage pits, while migratory routes were bisected by relentless straight lines of stone. The environmental footprint of Roman roads stretched far beyond their physical edges, altering landscapes in ways still visible today through pollen studies and soil analysis. This duality, progress and pain, intertwined echoes in modern infrastructure debates. Like Roman roads, our highways and shipping lanes enable both cultural exchange and climate change, economic opportunity and labor exploitation. The lesson isn't that connectivity is inherently harmful, but that every engineering triumph carries responsibilities its creators might not foresee. Those ancient stones ask us an uncomfortable question. When we build for the ages, are we considering all who will pay the price? The roads endure, but so do their shadows, reminding us that history's greatest innovations are rarely simple tales of glory. They're complex legacies, paved with ambition and stained with sacrifice, waiting for us to walk their lengths with clear eyes. Satellite imagery and digital mapping have peeled back the layers of time, revealing the ghostly outlines of Roman roads stretching like pale scars across the landscapes of Europe and beyond. On your laptop screen, you can now trace the Via Appia's arrow-straight path from Rome to Brindisi with pixel-perfect clarity, or watch as GIS algorithms highlight the Fossway's relentless march across England, a feat that would have left 19th-century archaeologists breathless with envy. This isn't just armchair exploration, it's a revolution in how we understand Rome's reach. When researchers overlay LiDAR scans onto modern terrain, entire lost sections snap into focus. Roads buried under Spanish vineyards, hidden beneath German autobahns, or lurking under the shifting sands of North Africa, their geometries too precise to be nature's work. The magic happens in the details. Zoom in on Google Earth's high-resolution views of the Via Traiana in Italy, and you'll spot subtle discolorations in crop marks that betray buried stone foundations beneath the soil. Switch to elevation maps, and suddenly the genius of Roman grading reveals itself. Those barely perceptible slopes that kept water draining efficiently still influence how rainfall flows across fields today. Archaeologists using these tools made a startling discovery in Portugal: a missing segment of the Via Nova that curved unexpectedly around a long-vanished marsh, proving Roman surveyors adapted to ecology far more than their straight-line reputation suggests. But the real game-changer is predictive modeling. By feeding road width, material composition, and typical alignment patterns into AI systems, researchers can now forecast where unknown roads might lie. In 2022, this technique uncovered 7 miles of the Via Aurelia near Pisa, perfectly preserved under a pine forest. The algorithm flagged the anomaly based on tree growth patterns. Pines along the ancient roadbed grew slightly stunted due to shallow soil over compacted Roman rubble. These digital prospectors are rewriting maps daily. Estimates suggest we've only physically uncovered 30% of Rome's total road network, leaving 70% waiting as spectral lines in satellite data. Crowdsourcing has turbocharged the hunt. Platforms like Omnis.org let history buffs overlay ancient itineraries onto modern maps, comparing them with aerial surveys. A British retiree analyzing Cotswolds farmland in 2021 noticed peculiar hedge lines that matched Roman survey angles. Her tip led to the rediscovery of a lost branch road connecting 2 villas. Meanwhile, gamers exploring the open-world title, Assassin's Creed Origins, have spotted accurate recreations of desert routes like the Via Hadriana. Their in-game travels cross-referenced with real archaeological databases to confirm locations. The implications stretch far beyond academia. Urban planners in Nimes, France, used ground-penetrating radar to map the Via Domitia beneath their city center before a tramline expansion, discovering the modern road network had unconsciously followed Roman axes for centuries. In Turkey, conservationists employ thermal drones to monitor erosion along the Appian Way, creating 3D models that guide restoration. Even astronauts on the International Space Station have joined the effort, photographing faint road traces in the Libyan desert visible only from orbit. What's most humbling is realizing these digital tools haven't diminished Rome's achievement, they've magnified it. Every new scan confirms the astonishing consistency of their engineering across continents and climates. Whether in the drizzle of Wales or the furnace of Jordan, those roads share the same DNA: meticulous foundations, intelligent drainage, and an almost obsessive commitment to direct routes. The next time you open Google Maps to check traffic, spare a thought for the original network that made such connectivity possible, one that's still being uncovered, 1 pixel at a time in the digital age. The crumbling stones of the Appian Way hold secrets far more valuable than their age. They're a masterclass in sustainable engineering that modern cities are only now rediscovering. Take drainage. Those cleverly cambered surfaces and roadside ditches didn't just prevent puddles, they mimicked natural watersheds, channeling rainwater to replenish aquifers instead of overwhelming sewers. Compare that to today's concrete jungles, where stormwater rushes into overloaded drains, and suddenly Rome's approach feels startlingly modern. Engineers in Amsterdam recently studied the Via Appia's original grading, applying its principles to redesign flood-resistant bike lanes that absorb runoff like the ancient roadbed once did. Durability is another revelation. While modern highways crack and buckle within decades, Roman roads thrived for centuries because they worked with nature rather than against it. Their lime mortar actually absorbs carbon dioxide. As it ages, a carbon-negative material we're only now replicating with high-tech geopolymers. In Seville, architects restoring a section of the Via Augusta discovered the original builders mixed local volcanic ash into their concrete, creating a self-healing material that filled its own cracks over time. Startup companies today are racing to patent similar formulas, unaware the patent expired roughly 2,000 years ago. Urban planners are mining these ancient routes for smarter city designs. Rome's highways weren't just transportation corridors, they were linear ecosystems supporting commerce, housing, and agriculture in balanced layers. The Tabula Peutingeriana, a medieval copy of a Roman road map, shows how settlements flourished at precise intervals matching a day's travel, creating a rhythmic urban fabric that prevented sprawl. Copenhagen's finger plan, where transit lines extend like fingers with green spaces between, directly echoes this concept, proving good ideas transcend eras. Even Rome's habit of aligning roads to solar paths for natural lighting inspires today's net-zero energy communities. Perhaps the most urgent lesson lies in resilience. When Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii's streets in ash, the roads remained intact beneath the devastation, a lifeline for survivors and later explorers. Modern disaster response teams study how Roman networks with multiple redundant routes kept functioning after earthquakes, much like today's decentralized internet. After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans rebuilt its floodwalls using compacted earth techniques borrowed from Roman ramparts, while Tokyo's earthquake-proof roads now incorporate the flexible layered foundations first seen on the Via Flaminia. The ultimate irony, our obsession with disposable infrastructure has led us full circle. The same stones once dismissed as antiquated now model sustainability, their repair-focused mindset a rebuke to our throwaway culture. As climate change forces harder choices, those ancient engineers whisper across time, build not for next quarter's profits, but for the next millennium. Their roads ask us a simple question: why keep reinventing the wheel when the Romans already perfected it? The Roman roads were never just stone and mortar. They were the living pulse of an empire, beating across mountains and deserts to unite 3 continents under a single rhythm. Every groove worn by chariot wheels, every milestone planted with imperial pride, tells a story far grander than engineering. These were the threads that stitched together languages, religions, and cultures, transforming the Mediterranean world from a patchwork of tribes into a shared civilization. Today, when we drive highways that follow their ancient surveys or walk city streets laid over their foundations, we're not just moving through space, we're traveling through time. Consider the quiet genius of their longevity. While modern asphalt cracks under frost and buckles under heat, Roman roads endure because they worked with nature rather than against it. Their cambered surfaces shed water like a duck's back, their layered foundations flexed with the earth, and their materials were sourced locally. Lessons in sustainability we're only now relearning. The bridge at Alcantara still stands after 18 centuries because its builders inscribed it with a promise: I will last forever. That's not arrogance, it's a challenge to the future. But the true legacy of these roads isn't just in their stones, it's in the ideas they carried. Along these pathways, Latin became Spanish and French. The cult of Mithras met the teachings of Christ, and Trajan's laws blended with Germanic customs. The roads didn't just connect places, they created conversations, turning strangers into neighbors across impossible distances. When Byzantine emperors reused Roman routes to defend against Persians, or medieval pilgrims followed them to Jerusalem, they proved that infrastructure outlasts empires. Even our digital age owes them a debt. The very concept of a network, whether fiber optic or paved, traces back to Rome's unshakable belief that connection is the antidote to chaos. So what do we owe these ancient engineers? Not just preservation, but attention. To walk the Appian Way at dawn, when the mist clings to its basalt slabs, is to hear echoes of sandals and hooves that haven't fallen silent in 2,000 years. To trace the Fosse Way across England's rolling hills is to follow a line drawn when Britain was still a frontier. These roads ask us to look down, not just at GPS screens, but at the ground beneath us, where history's fingerprints still press into the earth. The next time you're stuck in traffic on some modern highway, remember, you're part of a story that began with legionaries tamping down gravel under a Mediterranean sun. Those Romans built for eternity, and against all odds they succeeded. Their roads remain not as relics but as reminders. The world shrinks when we choose to bridge it. Now it's your turn. Have you ever stood where a Roman stood, on stones that outlasted kingdoms? Share your stories below, and let's keep this conversation rolling, just like the wheels that first polished these ancient paths.